What is up, duelists, and welcome to another Yu-Gi-Oh video. I want to talk about Genesys format to you guys. It's been a few weeks since they've introduced this format, and I want to talk about what's been going on in Genesys format. How has it been received? What kind of decks are good? What changes am I expecting in the future? What updates do I expect them to make to the points list, and so on and so forth. And then I want to lead into some more general discussions about the potential of the format, what it could or could not be, who it's for, and so on and so forth. So if you've been enjoying Genesys format or asking yourself whether you should get into it or not, this is going to be a good discussion video for you. Please let me know in the comments down below. Have you been playing Genesys? How have you been liking it? What kind of decks have you been tinkering with? How are you liking the power level and their approach to the format, and so on and so forth? All the good stuff. But let us get right in. Before we do, though, I want to give a quick shout out to Steven Santoli, someone who one of my favorite players from North America, who has joined me on my stream, and we had a very long and interesting talk about Genesys format and also his experience at YCS Anaheim playing in the Genesys Invitational. And that I deemed it a little bit too long to go on the main channel, because these types of videos, I think we talked about like almost 90 minutes. Those type of videos don't tend to do very well on the main channel, because, you know, watch time and all that stuff, but I will still upload it because it was a very good talk. So shout outs to Steven Santoli, and you guys can find that on the Plus channel. I'll upload both of these videos at the same time, so a link to that is going to be in the description. Without further ado, Genesys format. They introduced Genesys format at this point almost 3 weeks ago, and the hype surrounding it, I felt like was pretty high. People were very excited for it. And it was introduced as this kind of like simpler way to play modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Of course, no link monsters, no pendulums, and we have a new way to basically handle problem cards, and in that we are not using the FNL list, and instead we're using point cost, right? I'm not going to go over the exact details or the list here too much, because I've already done that in a previous video. And they've obviously introduced it as something that is for duelists looking for a less complicated game, duelists who are new to the game, and so on and so forth. And we're going to take a look at the current state of Genesys format and basically see what exactly it offers, and whether it is these things, and then also what it could be in the future. So this is what happened at the Genesys Invitational at YCS Anaheim. We had a wide spread of different decks making it into the top 16 and top 8, with Vanquish Soul taking it all, and a variety of other strategies, not just like the decks. These decks are not just different in their name, and I think that is also something that's very unique to Genesys format in a way. These are also decks that are very different in their playstyle. You know, you have an Odeon deck here, which is a very different playstyle from Vanquish Soul. You have a Generator deck trying different versions of Generator, I think, were also played in the tournament. You have a Radiant Typhoon Runic deck, which is basically all spells, no hand traps, and try to just establish card advantage that way. And so that is, I think, one of the things I've immediately noticed in Genesys format is that like decks tend to be played more true to what I guess their intended playstyle, I suppose. You know, you'll very often the link monsters being so generic in Advanced Constructed often end up in decks being maybe more combo-y than they were initially intended, where you'll even see Odeon decks in the TCG perform some combos to get to Silhouette Rabbit to make their end board even stronger. Or like they'll go like Gallant Granite, search for Lord of the Heavenly Prison, then link that off into Silhouette Rabbit, and so like adding layers and layers to their end boards, and basically making them feel like combo decks with some purple cards in them. Sometimes, not all the builds of the deck do that, but some definitely could. Whereas in Genesys, you very much play the deck as you would an Odeon deck expect to look. You know, just like a bunch of traps, a couple of non-engine, of course, in there, but very much an Odeon deck. And it does seem to be a very viable strategy. And this leads me into another thing. I feel like a lot of the non-engine choices that people are making in Genesys format are cards that I associate with healthy gameplay. And that this, once again, does not go for every single card. Like Droll Lockbird, for example, is a card that a lot of people are frustrated playing against, and we'll see what happens to this card in the future of Genesys format, but that's a different topic. But a lot of cards, like I'm referring to cards like Needle Sealing, Cosmic Cyclone, to an extent even evenly matched in the main deck being a viable card. Nibiru, a lot of cards here that maybe in the TCG would be, or in Advanced Constructed would be different kind of cards. In Genesys, you're able to play a lot of different approaches and a lot more cards. Like you'll see Cosmic Cyclone in almost every single deck. We have cards like Ultimate Slayer, Lava Golem, And once again, this deck is a prime example of a deck that basically has no non-engine in the main deck and still functions in Genesis format, which I can't even think of a single example of a deck like this in Advanced Constructed at the moment, because even the spell-heavy board breaker decks, like Sky Striker, for example, are pretty heavy on non-engine. Your non-engine is board breakers like Thrust or whatever, but Raigeki and so on. But playing the deck with just engine, I feel like is almost unheard of for quite a while in Advanced Constructed. Now, you could obviously argue the runic cards in this deck kind of function like non-engine. You've got Flashing Fire for removal and Freezing Curses for negation and so on and so forth. But realistically, this is a pretty engine-heavy approach that hasn't been done like this in quite a while in Advanced Constructed, I feel like. But it's looking healthy. While like basically the way I interpret all of this is at the moment it seems like there are certain strategies in Genesis format that are a little bit more powerful than others. Like they're definitely Vanquish Soul. I think it seems like the best deck in the format, and there are some other decks that are obviously going to be better than others. But I feel like that is a natural development as soon as people start taking a format seriously from a competitive perspective. There's going to be strategies that are going to crystallize themselves as the best decks in the format, or at least better than maybe the average deck. And so what you will find is a meta game develops. That is very natural. So I think what we need to look at here is the type of Yu-Gi-Oh that is being played here, basically. Because whether a deck is the best deck or not does not determine, in my opinion, whether the format is healthy or not, at least not as the sole factor. But I feel like the Yu-Gi-Oh that's being played here, the power level of the Yu-Gi-Oh that's being played here is something I vibe with. You know, it's not I wouldn't call it necessarily super slow, because these are still modern Yu-Gi-Oh archetypes. You know, modern Yu-Gi-Oh decks, they will definitely play very differently than what you might expect if you are getting into Genesis from, let's say, the last time you've played is 2017 because you quit when Lynx came out because that was doing too much for you. This is definitely a step up in terms of power level than what happened in 2017 still. But it's definitely closer to it. And I've talked about this specific aspect with Steven Santoli as well. The power that Link monsters offer to Yu-Gi-Oh is really, really hard to explain. Like everyone understands that Link is the best summoning mechanic, and Link does a lot for these decks. But really, these extra deck monsters being accessible at all times with basically any combination of monsters is a crazy powerful toolbox. And also another aspect that we talked about is that Link's not existing makes exceeds and fusions and synchros, it makes them weaker as well, because an example that Steven brought up on in the talk that we had is Gallant Granite, a card that you usually make to search a rock monster, but then you 99% of the time want to link it off into something else, because after doing that search, it doesn't provide anything further. In Genesis format, if you commit 2 bodies to make a rank 4 to search a card, that rank 4 is now basically a beatstick on your board. That Gallant Granite is going to stay. You do not get further value from that card. So that card is worse in Genesis format than it is in Advanced Constructed, which is an interesting point to look at. I hadn't really looked at it from that perspective, at least in theory, before this format has been played in actual tournaments, and it does make a lot of sense. You know, like I also noticed this a couple of times when I play Genesis format. I'm like, okay, my board is full now. I have my couple monsters here. I have no convenient way to make room or get value out of these bodies after I've used their effects. You know, there is not just as simple as, you know, make an SP, make a Nightmare, make whatever, make an Access Code when you're going second. Like the power level that this accessible toolbox provides to Yu-Gi-Oh is crazy, honestly. I mean, we're all I'm aware of this, but like when you really take links out of modern Yu-Gi-Oh, I feel like even when you understand how powerful links are, I feel like you still underestimate it. So lower power level, I think, is definitely a promise that Genesis format at the moment is able to keep. And I think that is good. A couple of outliers here and there, I would say. I think a card that is definitely going to get points, and we're going to get up into that in a second, is Pot of Extravagance. A couple of honorary mentions of cards that I would like to see being taxed a little bit higher to make the format a little bit healthier, in my opinion, is I would like to see a couple more points on Droll and Lockbird. I do understand that the card is like I feel like from their perspective, at least my theory is that they wanted Droll and Lockbird to be in Genesis format in the beginning because they weren't sure how the point system was going to play out. You know, are people going to find crazy combos to abuse? Because the Yu-Gi-Oh card pool is very large, and there's a high chance that they've missed some things with the initial point list. And so maybe their theory is like, okay, well, as long as Droll exists and is cheap enough for people to just side deck, then you know, it can't get too bad, because people will have to consider, does my deck do okay into Droll, right? It comes at the cost of some rogue decks being weaker because Droll exists. You know, I've been running into this problem with my Dragon Ruler deck, for example, which has been doing pretty badly into Droll and Lockbird, even though I don't think my Dragon Ruler deck does not need to be kept in check by Droll and Lockbird, because even if Droll wasn't a thing, it wouldn't be like the best deck of the format or anything like that. But still, I think Droll and Lockbird over time should probably move closer towards like the 10-point mark. And if a crazy combo strategy emerges that you really need Droll for, then, you know, people could still play it, or that combo strategy probably should just get some points, and then that's that. The other card I wanted to mention is a card that was mostly prevalent in Exosister decks, and that is Dimension Shifter. Dimension Shifter being 10 points, it kind of blows my mind, because I don't enjoy the gameplay that this card provides at all, and I think it should be costed higher. I don't know if I agree with the fact that an Exosister deck is able to basically play 3 Shifter, 3 Droll and Lockbird, and we're not even halfway through the points yet, and we're able to afford playing Thunder King Ryu for 20 points. For example, which I think is kind of crazy. I guess it's searchable in this deck because they play the new Spirit monster that searches monsters with 800 attack or defense, and Ryo does have 800 defense. So searchable Ryo in Exosister on top of all that. So I've played against Exosister, by the way, in at YCS Lille in one of the publics I entered. That deck seemed powerful to me, but realistically, I felt like the power level it operates at, like, I don't know if they need to put points on Exosister, to be honest with you, because there are certain strategies that, even though they are meta, if they just operate on the desired power level for the format, then I think that's fine. And that's where I feel like certain decks are. I think Exosister is one of those decks where if Exosister is part of the best decks in the format, then that's probably desirable, you know? Like, even though I don't personally play Exosister, but like playing against Exosister, unless they have Shifter, doesn't feel that bad. And so I feel like the card that should get more points here is Shifter and not Exosister. This pure Exosister honestly feels fine to me. So Dimension Shifter, I personally would give it 30 points to the, I would put it in the range where I would allow people to play a Shifter deck if they really wanted to, but I think they should be basically out of points if they decide to play 3 Shifter. That's kind of where I stand. And I've heard both sides of the argument. I've heard people say Shifter should be 100 points because it's a lingering floodgate, which honestly, I wouldn't hate it, but I also don't think it's necessary, because the other side of the argument is we have a lot of variety in Genesis formats. So playing Dimension Shifter against something like Odeon doesn't feel that impactful, and you would rather spend your points otherwise. But as a matter of fact, at the moment, for 10 points per Shifter, it's not a high risk, you know? Like, it's not like you're paying a lot of points for your Shifters, so you might as well play it, which means you're gonna like just side it out against the Odeon deck, I guess, but then have a lot of auto win buttons in other matchups. So I think Shifter should go to a point total somewhere in the middle where you really have to think twice about spending those points. Whereas right now, I feel like the card is kind of like in a territory where if your deck doesn't care about Shifter, just play Shifter, because honestly, card is broken. So and that's kind of something that the initial point list is lacking a little bit, is that kind of balance. That in my opinion, this system is at its best when it finds a point value for a card where it's cheap enough for you to consider putting it into your deck, but it's not so expensive that you would never even consider it. And there's a couple of examples of cards that I think people are just not willing to play. One example that we brought up in our discussion was Terraforming, for example. 33 points for a Terraforming, even though I agree it's a powerful card and should have points, is not something that's going to happen. There's actually other, like, you look at this list, you'll always find cards that are too expensive to even see play. You know, Ashina, right above it. 33 points for a Tiny Spirit Ashina in a format where you can't even link it off into Monk. That's not going to happen. And I think that's like something that over time they're gonna get better at, like reducing cards that are just not seeing play because they're just too expensive. Because I don't want the 33 points on terraforming basically mean that it's banned essentially, right? I would want terraforming to be at a point total where it's a card you really have to think twice about putting it into your deck because it is expensive. Like I would say something like 20-ish about for terraforming seems about right, or maybe 15, right? Where like playing a playset of terraforming now costs about half of your points, which is pretty hefty. You know, there's a lot of good cards on this list that you would like to play, and then you will really think about playing terraforming if you really want to. But if you really need that consistency for your field spells, you can play terraforming. Maybe 20 sounds about right. And so basically that's what I'm trying to get at. If they put Shifter at 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 points, that's going to basically make people completely stop playing Shifter, which for some people, some of you are going to say, good, exactly what I want. But I don't think that is the spirit of Genesys format, personally. Even though I don't like Shifter as well, I don't think that is in the spirit of the format. I think the spirit of this format is that you get to choose what you play. And by making a card so expensive that it's basically completely unreasonable to play, you take away that choice. The decision-making process in building your deck is then, like, you know, it's not there because you don't have to think about it. If Shifter's 100 points, it's not worth playing. And this is not true for every card. You know, some cards at 100 points still see play. We saw a generator deck top with VFD. 100 points for a VFD. The rest of the deck is 0 points, all budget options, but we are playing the 100-point VFD. So depending on the power level of a card, 100 points does not necessarily kill it, is something that's been proven by this, which I thought was very interesting. I was asking myself this question, like, are there cards on this list that people are willing to spend 100 points on? And the answer is yes. People are willing to experiment with these kind of cards, which to an extent you can find this cringe because VFD is seeing play. On the other hand, it's kind of like interesting that this is a dynamic that happens in Genesys format where someone builds a clearly inferior deck in terms of its non-engine, like by a lot compared to other decks, but gets to play that one copy of VFD, which is, I guess, an interesting part of the format. And the good news here is that with frequent ban list updates or point list updates, this is very easy to handle. You can slap literally 1 point on some of the generator cards, which is barely going to affect people playing generator the normal way. But you now no longer can play VFD in that deck, right? So if someone discovers something crazy, you don't actually have to punish all the generator players for it. You can just put like a very small point total on some of the generator cards, because that is another interesting thing that happened in Genesys format. Is there's 2 ways to play generator now. There are people who are not playing VFD and basically playing fair generator, and then they get to play a lot of good non-engine. They can spend their points however they want because the generator cards have basically 0 points. And then there's this version of the deck that plays VFD. And I think this sort of thing is desirable when it comes to the deck building process in Genesys format, right? So essentially saying, you get to play a singular floodgate or toxic card if you can find a shell that works with 0 points, and you also don't play any non-engine that costs any points, which at this point, if you have to make sacrifices to use these cards, I'm more okay with it. And it's once again something that they can fix very easily in the next update by just slapping 1 point on like Lobter or Boss Stage or Monstrosity or whatever, whichever they deem the most important card. So overall, the format's looking fun to me, at least. Let me know how you feel about this, but I've been liking a lot of the gameplay that I've seen from it. And another aspect that I want to bring up, because it's been obviously there's been a lot of talk about the balancing in the advanced constructed format, partially because I made that video at the start of last week where I complained about the floodgates and so on and so forth. A lot of those cards, I've brought that up in that discussion already, but a lot of those cards are missing from these decks. Genesys is not completely free from floodgates, but the density is so much less. Like, you look at these decks, the deck that won the tournament, and it's like, okay, well, it's side decking Droll and Lockbird, fair enough. And it's side decking Flying Sea for Exceed decks, which in the regards to Flying Sea, I think Flying Sea was honestly just an oversight, because they did put Contact Sea at 100 points. Where is it? Contact Sea is at 100 points in Genesys format because it's very hard to out if you can't just link it off. The same is true for Flying Sea. So I personally think that Flying Sea is going to get some points because that card was played a decent amount, and it's basically very punishing for a lot of the more like, because you do promote, without links, you do promote a lot of these decks that are more pure to their original playstyle. So if a deck is more of an Exceed deck, a lot of them play only Exceeds, and that is a problem when Flying Sea is 0 points and in a lot of people's side decks. So I expect Flying Sea to get some points. Once again, I don't know if it's going to go to 100 or if it's just going to get a point total where you're not willing to spend points on it, because that's another thing that I've noticed for my own deck building in Genesys format. At least I haven't really been putting cards in my side deck that require points, because I really want to spend my points efficiently, and so like I want them to be accessible in all 3 games. So like for me, it's usually been main and extra deck points. So I think Flying Sea does not need to be 100 for people to stop putting it in every side deck. Like I think if this thing is like 10 points already, people are going to think twice about spending 30 points in their side deck for just a couple matchups and only post side, right? Like a 10 to 20 points of Flying Sea would already be enough for people, once again, to get into that range where you could consider playing it, but you have to think twice about it. And I think that is interesting. Which leads me, ultimately, I'm very happy with the state that the format is in right now, and I think we are going to see some small adjustments. But that leads me to how this format in general has been handled, which is honestly something I've been wanting to talk about even more than just the initial format. Because the initial format, you know, Genesys is going to be a hopefully fast evolving format with frequent updates, frequent smaller updates in terms of the point values, and the point values are obviously also different to a ban list, because a card gaining some points does not actually stop you from playing that card theoretically, because you can always make the decision. You know, if Holy Sue goes from 10 to 20 points in Vanquish Soul, you can still play Vanquish Soul. You just have to cut some non-engine or maybe cut the Ashes or something like that, which is going to make the deck significantly weaker. But ultimately, your decision on whether you're still going to play 3 Holy Sue or not. I guess unless they put it to like 40 points, at which point you cannot play 3 anymore. And then it becomes more restrictive. But in general, you know, just like point increases do not always equal deck dead or deck unchanged, but rather like you have to really play around with those points. But Genesys format has basically confirmed so far a couple of things that I was expecting from it, which is the fact that it seems like it's something they really care about, you know, starting with the amount of updates and just articles they've been posting for Genesys format on the website. You know, they've announced this format like 3 weeks ago, and we already have plenty of articles to read through where it's just like the developers sharing their thoughts on the format, you know, sharing stuff that like what they feel about what's been going on in Genesys format. And that the most recent one is the coolest one in my opinion, because just a couple days after YCS Anaheim, they published an article which from their perspective evaluates the things that have been going on at YCS Anaheim. So a lot of the things that I just talked about are actually also mentioned in this article. You know, they said, like, we recognize that Flying Sea was a card that stopped people from bringing Onomat here in this first paragraph. They said, we didn't expect people to play this much Pot of Extravagance, so you can expect this card to get some points. You know, it says, we would consider it a textbook example of a card outperforming its contract and quickly getting a raise in point of cost. So Pot of Extravagance most likely is going to be on the next point update and is going to receive some points, which is an amazing piece of communication here that we're getting, right? Like it's like it's like it's basically, it feels like being seen, right? It's like, okay, we see this card is very popular. We are aware. Expect this to be handled appropriately, which is awesome. And then they give a lot more insight, like what kind of themes were doing well, which kind of forbidden cards people played. You know, like they said, forbidden cards in general weren't that popular, but we saw some people play 3 Pot of Greeds for 90 points. We saw less Mirage of Nightmare than we expected. We saw some Chaos Ruler. We saw the Calamity, which they're talking about in the Generator deck, and so on and so forth. And the biggest news in this entire article is actually towards the bottom here, where it says the next update will be about 4 or 5 weeks after the last one, which essentially confirms that we are getting the next point list update in, from this point, less than 2 weeks, because the first one has happened, I think, 2 to 3 weeks ago at this from now, like from, so 4 to 5 weeks from back then is in like 2 weeks at this point. Which is awesome. You know, it is basically an announcement of the next update is in 2 weeks, which means we've gotten 2 updates by that point to Genesys format already, and it really feels like something they care about, which is awesome. So Genesys format, in my opinion, has been delivering so far. I've played it, I've watched it, and I've talked to people about it, and it feels awesome. And let me know if you guys agree, or if I'm just seeing it through, like, maybe I'm a little biased here because I'm so excited about it, so I'm interpreting more into this than there actually is. But that's how I've been feeling about it. So what do we make out of all of this? Or at least I'm asking myself this question. You know, what am I doing with Genesys format? As someone who's obviously been playing Yu-Gi-Oh in a very competitive way, where does this go? Where do I see this going? We know there is a YCS that has been announced for 2026 for Genesys format, which is going to be in the US, which I'm not gonna lie, even though I don't travel to the US very often, I am considering at the moment to go to that YCS because I'm liking the format so much. So that is probably going to happen if I can make it work. But it basically begs the question: how is the future of Genesys format looking? And I don't have an answer to this. I'm just discussing some possible things that I want to happen or that could happen. But I personally feel like if the format is as well received as it seems like at the moment, Genesys format could really be a real alternative way to play Yu-Gi-Oh next to the advanced constructed format. And if there is serious competition for this, I think there are going to be a lot of players who are going to participate in Genesys, maybe have Genesys as their main format even next to advanced constructed. There's going to be a lot of people who are going to play both because the gameplay, the underlying gameplay is not that different. You know, like the knowledge and the skills you need to perform in Genesys versus advanced constructed are relatively similar. They're basically going to be two different formats with the same underlying rules, minus link monsters and pendulums, which is, I feel like in this sense, it's kind of comparable to whether you're a TCG player or a Master Duel player, right? It's like you basically need similar skill sets for both. Of course, there's some stuff that's different because you're playing digital and you have like the help of some pop-ups and glowing buttons and so on and so forth. But like the underlying game skill is relatively similar, right? You're just going to have to get accustomed to a different format with slightly different decks or whatever, different tech cards to expect. But what it takes to play Yu-Gi-Oh is still going to be the same. But I can see myself, and honestly, a lot of other people actually prefer the gameplay that Genesys provides in terms of the health and the balance of the format, because it really feels like something they care about in this format. And, you know, I've heard the theory a lot of times now that they are able to balance Genesys format better and faster because there's less people involved. And, you know, I could see this being the case. I don't know exactly how this works, but it really feels like something that there must be a reason why they're able to handle Genesys format this way and why they are handling advanced constructed a different way, which I've voiced my concerns about, but that's a different, an entirely different video. But I can see Genesys format being a thing if it takes off. And I also want people to understand that this format has positive impact, or can have positive impact on people even past the people that actually play it. Because even if you're a TCG player and you don't really, or an advanced constructed player rather, and you don't want to play Genesys, or you don't prefer Genesys over advanced constructed, that's completely fine. But I do think even those people could benefit from Genesys format being successful, because one thing that Genesys format does, and it is already kind of doing this, I think, is it's driving demand for certain cards or certain archetypes in products that otherwise would be viewed as not very good in advanced constructed. And that is going to, in my opinion, help and is a potential solution for a problem that we've been having in Yu-Gi-Oh! With the product quality being very all over the place. Some of them have been very good, some of them have been pretty bad, and some recent examples like Duelist Advance or whatever now has an archetype that is meta in Genesys format, and that is Archmage. Archmage is an archetype that, of course, people were kind of speculating on in the beginning for advanced constructed, but as it turns out, it's not viable at the moment in advanced constructed. And Genesys gives this deck a home. You can now look at new sets through another perspective, through another lens, of Genesys format and ask yourself, are these cards maybe good in that format if they're not good in Advanced Constructed? The same goes for Radiant Typhoon in Doom of Dimensions. I do think Genesys format helps Doom of Dimension be a better set. And this is something that even people benefit from who don't play Genesys format, because if you open a Radiant Typhoon secret rare in your box, and you don't need it for Advanced Constructed because it's not good there, you will probably find someone who wants it for Genesys format, and you might get more for it than what you would have gotten if it wasn't for Genesys format, right? So I think that's an awesome possibility here that we as the Yu-Gi-Oh community have if this format takes off. And I don't know, I've been rambling. You can tell I'm passionate about this because I just love Yu-Gi-Oh, and more ways to play the game is always good in my opinion. And this is looking like a real alternative. I think this is also something that's seeming very good to me because of basically the I see an obvious difference between how this is handled and how Advanced Constructed is handled. And I know which way of handling a game I prefer, and that is Genesys. Now, I'm a very competitive person, and I do need events to compete in and a community behind it, of course, that is interested in it and so on and so forth. But I can see myself committing more to Genesys and preferring Genesys tournaments if this is a development that keeps happening. You know, if Genesys keeps delivering, and if Advanced Constructed keeps not delivering in the sense that what's currently happening, you know, like if then Genesys is going to be better Yu-Gi-Oh in my opinion, and then it is something that I would prefer if there's tournaments for it. Now, I don't think it's ever going to replace Advanced Constructed, and I also don't think it's ever going to make me quit Advanced Constructed, but I can definitely see there being a universe where like either essentially, it could be that we have a couple of YCSs each year that are Genesys format, and then a couple of YCSs each year that are Advanced Constructed. Or we could have maybe both at the same event, but they're not treated as like one is the main event and the other one is like the smaller public event. But you could maybe have a YCS be like a convention where there's a Advanced Constructed tournament that's considered a YCS, and there's a Genesys tournament that is considered a YCS, and both have like their own stream and everything. I'm not sure how good of an idea that is, because we will have a lot of people that are going to be playing both, like myself. So like having to choose, I don't know how good that is. But I guess we'll find out. That's how Pokemon does it. I ran across this just this weekend. They're actually live right now. You know, they have their tournaments and like regionals in Milwaukee right now. There's a TCG tournament, a Pokemon Go tournament, a VGC tournament happening at the same time, and none of them is treated as like inferior or not the main event, right? They're all the main event, right? There's a TCG regional, a Go regional, and a VGC regional. You can play whichever one you prefer, and there you go. It's just all Pokemon players coming together. And I honestly don't see why it couldn't be the same for Yu-Gi-Oh, unless it really becomes a problem where everybody wants to play both, right? And then maybe we'll see something more like in Magic, where I think for Magic, each individual event has one of their formats, which I wasn't able to find as much. I thought those were called Grand Prix in Magics, but apparently those are not a thing anymore. The only thing comparable I was able to find was the Spotlight series, which I think is a new thing, and that is always in one format. By the way, this one, the one I found, is happening in less than 2 weeks, and 96 players are registered out of 2,000. Are you okay? Is Magic okay? I don't know. This is all I could find in a limited time, because I was looking for examples from other games, but yeah, Pokemon does all formats basically at the same time, and you just decide which one you want to play. And Magic does dedicated tournaments to each format. I guess let me know what you would prefer. For me, it depends on the frequency. You know, I would enjoy playing both, having the option to play both formats every once in a while, and just, you know, maybe concentrate more on the one that I think is better. But yeah, a lot of this is, of course, speculation, because we don't know how well Genesys is going to do. We don't know if it even has the potential to be as big as Advanced Constructed. We don't know if that's something they will let happen. You know, maybe Advanced Constructed is still like their baby, and they will always make sure it's bigger than Genesys. But like, you know, even if we only get like 1 or 2 Genesys YCSs per year, that could still be very hype and something to really look forward to if the format really is as awesome as I think it could be. anyways, we will probably talk about Genesys soon again. I'll probably have some gameplay because my locals is also going to start doing Genesys format. And we are also definitely going to talk about the next point update. In general, let me know how you feel about Genesys content. You know, are you interested in Genesys gameplay, Genesys deck profiles? My Dragon Ruler deck profile did pretty well. Sorry for rambling this long, or you're welcome, depending on whether you enjoy that. If you want even more Genesys rambling about balancing, current state of the game, future of the format, even some comparisons to Advanced Constructed, the link to the talk with Steven Sintoli is in the description down below. That is about 90 minutes long, which is why I decided to make this video for the main channel, even though 35 minutes is still relatively long. So I hope you watched until the end. If you did, thank you. Make sure to leave a like and let me know in the comments how hyped you are for Genesys format. Anyways, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time, duelists.